Viscosity, I think it's just old wives' tales coming back to surface again. You know, they see something, it might make them more aware. And if they probably would have been that aware going in, they probably would see the same thing.
I read an article one time how with all the Shelby cars that came out with synthetic, when they came out, the stuff was $5, $6 a quart still to change. And people were like, oh, I'll just put regular. And that was like a super unleaded treat to put synthetic in your car. And I guess in that same article it said now it's starting to come out that some of these vehicles are leaking because of the constant flip-flop back and forth.
I think that goes back to this guy.
Okay, in everyday driving, how much is going to a 0 and how often on 7, 8, 19, 6, 222, how often is fuel oil change?
Let me give you guys a...
And you need to change the oil every time you change the filter.
No, let me shoot you something real simple and easy, real thoughtful for just a minute. Let me tell you what I do. My motorhome out there. Drive a lot. So I got to drive from Houston back to Fredericksburg, okay, because that's where I'm kind of moving to here very sharply. And I put a lot of miles on this thing. It's 500 miles round trip. You know, I got almost probably 3,000 just coming out here to visit you guys. So I put a lot of miles on it. And what I do is I go buy 5 quarts of just mobile oil. And I put in 1 quart of synthetic. I run it on 99-cent petroleum base because I change it every 3,000 miles. But I put in 1 quart of synthetic to get the synthetic additive pack that makes that petroleum-based oil much more viable.
So it's basically like the semi-synthetic blend.
Exactly, because you can also buy semi-synthetic blend, petroleum-based base stock with synthetic additives, where they hit you somewhere in between. This is anywhere from $3.49 to here in town. I found it at $4.99. Over, John, where would you go buy all your parts at? That little, what's the name of that place over there?
Checker.
Checker. It's $4.99. I bought gasoline in Texas before I got here for 89 cents a gallon. I couldn't believe it when it was $1.32.
You guys aren't using a refill-related gas?
Yes, we are.
You are?
It depends where you're at in Texas. Houston and El Paso, yes, we use
It's still that same price, though.
Remember what I just said. If you guys are going to change it frequent, no, if it's a pure performance car, I would stay 100% synthetic. If it's a car that you drive for your daily operator or whatever, just use 4 quarts. It's a 5-quart system. 4 quarts of that particular brand's base petroleum oil, and then 1 quart of synthetic, and you've got the synthetic protection, okay, that you always have with a pure synthetic blend. Did that answer your question?
Does Mobile make a 0.30?
Yes. As a matter of fact, they just introduced this in 0.30 oil. It's been out for a month now. Yes.
If you want to do a test to see your synthetic versus some of your other oils, something I did when we was running our Indy car a few years ago was I stole my wife's blender and went out to the shop and heated up the oil, and we were running injected alcohol, and we wanted to see how it mixed and what aerated, and some of the name brand oils, how they aerated in that blender. You wondered how the motors ever worked.
We did a study back in 1986.
She didn't want her blender back either.
And what we were dealing with was when we were road racing, we'd come back in after really pushing the car hard, somewhere around 60, 6100 RPM. That's over the threshold limit of our lash adjusters. And we would come back in. We had lash adjusters that were just raising hell.
Oh yeah.
And when they come back in raising hell, you have got a duration change on your camshaft now.
Yep.
You've got a radical fall off in performance. So we thought, what in the devil's going on in this engine? You know, what is happening here? So what we did, I was up there in Highland Park at the time, we got it 2-2, we cut a window on the side of the engine, cut a window on the side of the pan, and we hooked up a strobe light. And we actually had a window right here on the back side of the pan. We hooked up a strobe light, stopped the crank. And when we looked at the connecting rods, they looked like tan cotton candy. That's how coated they were with aerated oil. And there was actually about a quart of oil at 6 grand sitting in this pan on a 5-quart system. A quart of oil sitting in the pan at 6 grand on a 5-quart system. We had about 3 quarts in the head And we had about an additional 2 quarts that were hanging on the connecting rods in the crankshaft in what looked like foamed cotton candy. Now that's parasitic. We were creating parasitic drag of all that foamed oil that was coming off those connecting rods. Okay? And that was the one reason I sat down and I did this. This was a thing I designed, this directional screen where when the oil did get thrown off, it would condense it back to a liquid. And we made 7 horsepower just by doing this statically on a dynamometer. What the hell is this going to do out on a road racetrack? Whatever, you go out and get a fan and dip a fan down in a bucket of water. You can see how much it drags the fan down. Think about that when you're drag racing. Like I say, you know,
You guys didn't have to, you guys didn't have to use a bigger pan, you just went with that and that solved the problem?
we fixed the problem on petroleum-based oils with that right there. At the same time, Mobil came to us up at Road Atlanta. The Mobil guy came over to me and he says, Ed, my name's, I can't remember what the guy's name was. He kind of looked like Rick, you know. Kind of looked like Rick. He says, I'm a Mobil guy. He says, do you want to try some of our synthetic blend oil? You know, I'd already dealt with synthetic oils. There was an outfit by the name of Pazer Oil Company that came to us, and they were involved with the Cincinnati, the Chicago, the St. Louis, the Houston police departments, and they were trying to pump synthetic oil down their throats to where they could run 50,000 miles without ever changing the oil on police cars. Right. I mean, you know, but you're dealing with politicians now. And at that time, the additive pack that they had in there caused every piece of rubber, if we want to call it rubber, okay, to swell. I mean, the valve stem seals were this big. Okay? You know, I mean, I got police chief in Chicago calling me on the phone. And he says, come here. You know, I got 1,000 of your police cars, and they all got problems. You know, I go over and look at it. You know, and they're all sucking oil and smoking and carrying on. I go, what? You know, and of course, they always think that the warranty goes for 500,000 miles. Because they bought 1,000 police cars at cost. You know, fleets are the worst parasite you could ever deal with. Rick knows what I'm talking about. Yeah. They want everything for free. So I go up there and I say, okay, let's do a teardown analysis. You know, that's what John Jasinski did for a while. He was an engine teardown analysis for Chrysler. That's what he's still, you know John. He's been involved on the performance side. They would tear all these engines down for us, and we'd walk in and we would do an analysis of this is what we see. Well, over here I'm looking at valve stem seals that are swollen in the inside of the valve spring. They couldn't even get the springs off the damn engine, pry them off with a screwdriver because the valve stem seals were all swelled up. Okay? We even had the coolant hoses that were just in the atmosphere underneath the hood that were swollen up this big. That was the initial reaction that I had with synthetic oils. Okay? So like I say, it took me a while to get myself re-educated to oils, and particularly synthetic base. Filters. We got another new thing happening in filters. Now we got Purolator and we got Fram. Everybody in the world, Fram has just come out with a double filtration filter with PTFE. We got Slick 50 in the filter now that they sell to you. So they said Slick 50's making all kinds of money. We're going to join on the bandwagon. If they're making money, now we'll sell you a filter with the stuff in it. Okay? So now we got double solids going through our motor. Now, a filter's premise in life is to do nothing more than clean the oil and not restrict any form or flow of the oil. So if we get a filter, and this thing can probably get down to about 5 microns, which is pretty damn small. Okay? If we got a good filter with a metal base, okay, a good bypass system in it, and a thick enough container that can handle some cold climates like where Kenny lives, where it's 25 degrees below zero. Can you imagine the pressure that's sitting in this can? And it does have a bypass in it, and I've seen some of them where they'll actually explode off the car. But now we've got a filter that has done adequate filtration, but the public doesn't want to change their oil anymore. I couldn't tell you how many product liability lawsuits that I went out on for Chrysler, where the individual was suing us because at 35 or 40,000 miles they denied his warranty because he didn't know he had to change his oil. He didn't know that. Nobody told him. He didn't know that. You don't read his owner's manual anymore. But that's what you see out there. So now what we've got is filter manufacturers that are jumping on the bandwagon because they saw Slick 50 making money. And we got Purolator now, who's one of the better filters going, who's a supplier for Chrysler. Fram is a supplier for Chrysler. Gould is a supplier for Chrysler. Okay? who have got this paper media, and they have doubled it. I can't even squeeze this thing together enough. But they're sending out a filter now called a double filtration filter that is about impacted that tight with paper media. So they've doubled the paper media, and they have increased the resistance of your oil to go through the filter.
How long does it take the oil to get to the crank when you start up?
Probably 20 seconds.
Okay, what about one of those double filters?
Probably about a minute in some instances.
Wow.
Okay. Now, you guys drive cars that for the most part sit in the garage. And you got collector's cars. And they sit in the garage. And they sit in the garage. Kenny's got a couple that are growing, the tires are growing out roots, okay? Because it's so cold up there, you can't get them out of the garage sometimes. And that filter's sitting there in that oil. Metal end caps.
My friend's paper.
Pure Layer. They make Pure Layer. They make Mopar. AC Delco makes Mopar.
Wicks will like that too.
Wicks. Metal end caps. Cardboard. How long is that going to sit in a derated environment?
I've actually had one go through my motor. Stuck up, getting oil galleries and stuff like that.
What is this? Cheaper way to make something cheaper. But it's a name that everybody knows. Think about that when you guys go buy a filter. Enough said on that.
And Wicks does make the filter, small filter for the Shelby GLHS.
Oil systems. Let's get off into oil. We're going to jump in the block. Anybody need to go to boys' room?
You were going to talk about how often you should change your oil.
I would say somewhere around 3,000 miles, Cap. That's a pretty good figure.
And every time you change the filter, you should.
Not necessarily so. Not necessarily so. It depends upon the environment that it's in. If you've got a good filtration system on it, if you guys have jumped over to a K&N, okay, on your induction side, God's sakes, make sure you spray with K&N oil. Don't go out there and spray with WD-40. It ain't gonna work. WD-40 is nothing but just, it's not even propane anymore. What the heck's in it now? Carbon dioxide, some type of aerated oil that doesn't even protect from rust anymore. Okay? Used to be able to start the lawnmower with this stuff. I used to use WD-40 to start my lawnmower. It won't start the lawnmower anymore. So, yeah. It's not even a good water disperser because even a lot of my parts here sitting in a high humidity environment that I live in Houston, I still have corrosion of parts, even sprayed with WD-40, so I gotta use something different. I gotta find something better than that.
Freol.
There you go. Good one.
Freol turns in like almost like positive
Yeah.
kind of stuff.
You almost have to wash it off.
Yeah.
Let's go into the oil system, and then we'll go into what block. You know, if we build a house, and we're gonna build a house good, the most important thing on a house is the foundation. And the foundation for any of our development work is gonna be a block. Okay? There's all kinds of controversy. Should I use a swirl or a G-casting, you know, whatever you wanna call each one. I call them a swirl of the tub. Okay? But the basis of what we're gonna build upon, whether it be for Al for a stock motor, or you guys for 300 horsepower, whatever you want, we're gonna talk about early 88 down and common block up from 89 up. And what do we mean by common block? And when you get into manufacturing like Kenny's in, that's Chrysler Canada right there, they deal with commonality in the assembly plants. Okay? And that's a big term they use in manufacturing. Kenny or Rich will tell you that. Commonality. It takes, what did it take to build a car? 6,500 parts at one time, right? It used to be 8,500, then it fell to about, dropping it to 6,500 parts? Because an engine's considered a part. Transmission's considered a part. Because they come to the plant that way. Okay? But if we can reduce complexity in the assembly plant, that reduces inventory, and that reduces possible misassembly errors off the assembly line. Okay? Now, let's talk about oiling systems for just a minute. There was an oil pump, there we go, that came out 1985 and a half. Was a big change for Chrysler on the 2.2 engine. It launched in 81, and it went virtually unchanged until 84. Well, they made a cylinder head change in 83. And we went to a cylinder head that had a smaller intake runner to build velocity. In other words, we built speed instead of volume. Okay? We weren't after bigness again, we were after velocity, which built torque. That was the one big change. But in 85 and a half, we made a lot of changes in the engine. We went from a 6-bolt crank to an 8-bolt crank. We went to the, let's call it the pipe stand that comes off the main oil galley, okay, where all of your sending units go into and all of your oil feed hoses go into. That little particular orifice right there was only a 1/4 inch pipe. It had a lot of weight hanging on it. And in a lot of road race environments, that little pipe stand broke off. So we upped it to a 3/8 pipe. That was another change that we made. We went from 10mm head bolts to 11mm head bolts, because we were going from compression ratios on the early turbo motors, which were really basically like they were right after World War II. We had 7.5 to 1 compression motors, and really never ever got any higher on a turbo motor than about 8.25 to 1. So you're really driving World War II type motor without boost. You had a World War II type engine with no boost. That's why you putzed around, you had all that turbo lag in the damn thing. Okay? But the next big change that they made was in the oil pump. And we went from a pump that was pressure to a pump that pumped volume. And how do you identify it? By the 4-bolt cap. Okay? This is an 85.5 pump. You got a little bit taller height on the gears. It's also a G-rotor type pump, which means one of the vanes rides in another. That's called a G-rotor. Show you what it looks like on the inside. They got paychecks for everybody out here in just a minute. Am I boring anybody yet? Alan? That's a G-rotor where one rides into another one. Okay. And when you take one of these things apart, you clean it. This outer rotor has an up and down. You gotta be real careful with it. When you look at that outer rotor, it's radiused on one side. So when it goes down into the pump body, it meshes against the radius on the body. If you turn it upside down, you could seize the pump up. Okay? Maybe not, but you could possibly. So just be aware that there is an up and down, just like there's a front and back on a seal. So there could be a possibility of seizing that pump. Okay? This is the better pump. There's a pump that Mopar Performance sells, and I don't mean to demeanor a lot of their stuff that they sell, but a lot of their stuff was basically designed in the early 80s, and it's made by Mellings, and it weighs about 6 pounds more than this thing. It's a pump. It's a pump that really pumps pressure, and pressure is a robber of horsepower. This pump right here at 6 grand takes about 14 horsepower to turn it. That's how parasitic it is on the engine. That same Mellings pump takes about 21 horsepower to turn it. Plus it's pumping a lot more pressure that this system don't need. This is a volume pump, not a pressure pump. Now, if you've got a 4-bolt pump, it's a good basis to start with. Now, there's a couple things that you can do to blueprint this pump, and I do these all the time, is go back in there and machine it out a little bit on the inside with a Dremel, kind of smooth it out. But the real big obstructor that Chrysler never corrected on their motors is that orifice right there. What is that? That's oval, right? When you mate that up in the block, what does it mate to? A round hole. And which way is the oil going? To a round hole? And we got a oval? Boy, is the oil running against a wall. Whew, resistance. This pump's got to pump 14 horsepower at 4 grand, not 6 grand, because it's pumping against resistance. So when you guys do your rebuild, sit down and make a cardboard template of this, or you'll see the impression on the block from the staining, and you sit there with a die grinder and just bevel her out on the side. That little trick right there is worth about 6 horsepower.
Now, does that little trick right there have anything to do with 8 pounds of oil pressure at idle when warm?
8 pounds of oil pressure at warm is still satisfactory as long as you've got anything over 2.
It's really scary when you know, the stock gauge is like about halfway and you put a mechanical in and it drops down to 8.
Most stock gauges have dampeners in them for the idiot public. If you ever sat there and looked at a water temperature gauge in a stock car and you never see it move, put a mechanical water temperature gauge in one of our engines and watch the thermostat open up. Baby, it's scary, because you'll see it go from 110 and drop all the way down to about 140. And we wonder why we have cylinder head gasket problems. How happy would you be in the shower? And you're going to have a nice long shower, okay? How many times has your wife done this to you? You know, they all play these tricks. You're going to learn something now when you go home, okay? You know, to calm the old man down, here's a big bucket of water, and it's always cold, okay? They pour it over the shower door on you and think, oh, they run off laughing, you know? Does that ever happen at your house? No.
Or flush the toilet.
There you go.
But that's some of the things that take out our head gaskets. Okay? And I'm going to show you in a little bit how to fix a thermostat and how to stop that. But another thing that creates a lot of resistance in the oil is the stem pipe. And this little one-way device that's in there prevents this oil that's in this filter, because it screws on. That's the pipe stand. Hey guys, you going to join us? Yeah. All right.
So we'll have to test drive the Prowler. Sorry you missed it.
This little pipe stand that screws the filter screws onto, okay, has got a one-way check valve in it. Okay? Why is that for? Because the filter lays on its side, and some of the filter, after it sits overnight, some of the oil will drain back out of it, and it takes it about a second to fill. And what does the public hear out there when they start their car? Clack, clack, clack for a couple seconds. Oh, shit, I want the car bought back. And don't think we don't buy them back. Chrysler's got a damn used car lot going out of all the customer dissatisfaction bought back cars because the public doesn't understand squeaking brakes or whatever. Okay? Now, what does this do? Resistance. Take it out.
Take the ball out.
Take it all out of the center. Take the spring, the retainer, all the stuff that's sitting inside of it so that it looks like that. Okay? That's worth another horsepower. 1 horsepower. Okay? Plus the engine will lubricate a whole lot better. Oil pickup necks. Another big problem of restriction. This is the 81 to 95 and a half. I'm sorry, 85 and a half. That was used in the early blocks. The 5-bolt pump, pass it around. The 5-bolt pump on the early 85 and a half down also used a tube that was about 4 millimeters smaller than this one. This is an 85 and above. This was used from 85 through about 87. Okay? Horrible design. The guy that was involved in this program should have been sent down here with them. Okay?
I'm sorry you have to leave now.
That's two you get for it. No snow cones this afternoon. This is it's got a stand on it to support it from vibration. Okay. Now it's the only thing you can use. Let me give you some suggestions. What you want to do is you want to sit down. You know what a stake weld is, or a spot weld, or a stitch weld? Let's call it a stitch weld. Okay? That's a stitch weld. See where I just did a little bit of little spots on each side? Keeps that foot on there. Do that to each side. And sit here and just support some of these little induction welds that hold this brace bracket on. Okay? And the next thing you're going to do is you're going to sit down there with a die grinder. You got to be real careful now, because I don't want you to damage that screen underneath. Because that screen underneath catches birds and all the other little things that you got down in your oil. But I want you to round out that hole, just like I rounded out that hole, okay? So that it can take the volume of oil through it. Because this was designed for 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. And if you're going to run a performance car, you need to make it a little bit bigger, like I did that one, okay? See the difference? little simple thing that you can do. If you damage the screen, I suggest you throw it away and, go get another one. If you just want to be careful of it, just kind of push it down a little bit and kind of get the die grinder away from it, but elongate, pull the hole. That'll make it round. Get away from this stuff right here. Stake welded on the bottom, reinforce this one. And make sure that you put that rubber O-ring on there. Because I couldn't tell you how many guys forget to put that rubber O-ring that seals it down into the neck of the pump. And boy, you want to suck in air. Okay? And another thing that you do, and I forgot to tell you this before, Chrysler does not put a gasket between this base and the block. You know that stuff that they call anaerobic sealer? Looks like strawberry toothpaste. I forget what its nomenclature is from, what do they call it from Loctite? Anaerobic sealer.
Yeah, they run-
But they got a number on it. It's like 211 or
Something like that.
something like that. A little smear of that anaerobic sealer that looks like strawberry toothpaste around the base of this right here, and seal the oil pump to the bottom of the block after you've ovaled the hole. Okay? But you just made 3 horsepower right there. Just made 3. You put a pan on there with some professional ability to it, you probably got 7 right there. So there's 10. Okay? That's still in a dynamometer. Let's take a pee break.
What's this on?
88 deep stump pan like this one right here. Used on 87, 88 only.
2.5?
Deep stumps. Could be 2225.
Can you go big on the set, Diane? When I had mine done, I was doing it over the phone for your instructions, and I said one a little bit larger.
That's fine. I sometimes take the whole face out of it, okay? Another thing you gotta be careful of too is the height of this thing off the bottom of the pan. Remember the second knuckle. When you guys are building a motor and you got all the main caps off of it, the first thing I want you to do is bolt an oil pump in there. After you've done your ovaling of your hole, okay? Put this thing in there, and through the end of the pan, put this thing on the engine stand. I want you to reach down in there with your finger. And I want you to remember the second knuckle. And you're going to stick your finger underneath this thing, and that's the height that it needs to be off the bottom of the pan. If it gets any lower, it will vortex and suck itself dry. Could create all kinds of oil pressure problems. If it's too high, it could starve the engine for oil. So just remember the second knuckle. Tip of the finger, second knuckle. It's about 5/8 of an inch. And that's where you want to bend this thing accordingly so you get that height. Okay? Let's take a smoke break, potty break for just a few minutes. Okay, guys, let's get started.
You got anything
The best oil filter, in my opinion, is probably a Pure.
Joe.
The Chrysler filter that is distributed through Chrysler Mopar is about 3 steps of a better filter. They require a better paper media than what Pure later sells to the common denominator public. Okay? So if you want to go pay $4 or $5 for a Mopar filter, it is a better filter than that filter right there. But of the filters that you can go buy from a parts store, probably the best one that you can buy is going to be a Pure. Okay? Or an AC. An AC is a good filter. Okay?
What's that earlier one that's dark blue now?
That's the one that's got
I don't think
the paper media all shoved
He
together.
doesn't like wiggles.
What do they call that?
Well, Deutsch is German. Go cut one apart. If you guys don't have a filter cutter, and I wish I'd have brought mine with me. A lot of the engines that I build, the guy, I asked the guy, after he does the first oil change on it, put the filter in a container in a plastic bag and send it to me so I can do a qualitative analysis of what has come out of your motor after you've assembled it, because I don't assemble motors anymore. I'll ship you the componentry parts, you put it together, but you can't believe the stuff that falls down in there, during its term in your garage. So anyway, so I can see what's happening after 100 or 1,000 miles. And to a layman, as clean as I am, okay, you would be surprised what you'll find in the bottom of the filter. I mean, it's scary sometimes. Okay? I got to tell you guys a story about the cylinder filter. Back about 10 years ago, my wife and I were dating, and I was road racing at the time, and I was really into having clean parts. So anyway, I told her I was gonna take her out to dinner that night and go out, to show and all that stuff. We were dating, and she lived down the street.
You were talking about clean?